All right, it is 2:02, so I think we're going to get started here. My name is Kara Cute. I am an assistant professor in the Department of Human Ecology at Rutgers, New Brunswick, and an assistant extension specialist with Rutgers Cooperative Extension. On behalf of the entire conference organizing committee, I am so pleased to welcome you to the first of two sessions of our conference, Envisioning Hunger-Free College in New Jersey. We're pleased to welcome students, faculty, staff, community organizations, and interested community members to the conference. We have a number of conference goals that we're hoping we can all work toward together over the next few days. The first is to spread awareness about college student food insecurity, as well as other basic needs insecurities, to a statewide audience of diverse stakeholders. We're also hoping to deepen attendees' understanding of college student food insecurity and other basic needs insecurities as a social justice issue. We're hoping to work together to identify important policy, advocacy, and innovative programs and practices to address student food insecurity. And our final goal is to build connections and to encourage collaborative approaches to addressing these issues among institutions across the state. So ultimately, we really are hoping that by the end of this conference, participants will be able to envision hunger-free college in New Jersey and to identify ways that we can work collectively to make that a reality at all New Jersey colleges and universities. As you know, hopefully, this conference spans 2 days. Today, we're focused on issues of racial equity and college student basic needs and security. After some introductory remarks, we'll have our keynote speaker, Dr. Rashida Crutchfield, who will help us consider the role of social justice and food insecurity and really stretch our thinking beyond that to think about its role in basic needs and security more broadly. We'll move into smaller breakout rooms to discuss our presentation and then come back as a group for a Q&A with Dr. Crutchfield. Tomorrow, we will reconvene at 9 a.m. and we will hear remarks from Dr. Brian Bridges, the Secretary of Higher Education for New Jersey. We'll then have one panel focused on policy and advocacy, and a second panel focused on programming to address college student food insecurity. We will close out tomorrow with breakout discussions where we will all be asked to identify actions that we ourselves can take to address this issue. Before we begin, I just want to cover a few housekeeping items. During the presentation portion of the conference, all participants who are not speaking will be in a listen-only mode. You will not have access to your cameras or microphones. If you have a question during those presentations, you are welcome to submit them through chat. However, once we go into those collaborative breakout rooms, we will enable your cameras and microphones so that you can engage in conversation with your groups. As a reminder, the session is being recorded, and we will send the link for the recording to all registered attendees once we have it. However, we are not recording the breakout rooms as they're really designed to be a space where people can feel comfortable sharing. And finally, the Zoom link for the conference is the same for both days. Okay, so today we're very honored to share comments from the president of Rutgers University, Dr. Jonathan Holloway, as well as the Honorable Phil Murphy, the governor of the state of New Jersey. President Holloway is the 21st president of Rutgers, and he also serves as a university professor and distinguished professor. He joined Rutgers in 2020, and since then, he's demonstrated leadership and commitment to student well-being and success. So I am very pleased to introduce President Holloway, who will share some thoughts on our gathering, and then he will introduce our next speaker, Governor Phil Murphy.
Hello and welcome, everyone. It is an honor for me as president of Rutgers to be welcoming you to this virtual conference on a topic that means so much to me, ensuring that one of the most basic human needs is met here at Rutgers and for college students across New Jersey. I appreciate your joining us for this important conversation. Let me first thank the Office of the Secretary of Higher Education for administering the Hunger-Free Campus grants, which among other things are helping to fund this conference. We're looking forward to hearing from Secretary Brian Bridges when he speaks here tomorrow. I also want to welcome and thank today's keynote speaker, Dr. Rashida Crutchfield from California State University, Long Beach, who'll be setting the tone for this conversation. As we welcome all of you, I'm proud and grateful to know that the work being highlighted this week is happening on campuses across New Jersey, at community colleges and at four-year colleges and universities, because we know the need is statewide. From my own perspective, I'm especially in debt to the good people across Rutgers who have been thinking hard about this issue over the past several years. And more than that, they've been taking action to address the multiplicity of factors that put many young people in difficult circumstances and keep them from achieving their potential as students. This group of champions includes members of our student affairs teams on every campus who work with students every day and listen carefully to what they're struggling with. It includes members of our faculty in various disciplines who talk about food insecurity in the classes they teach. It includes student leaders who encourage their peers to speak up about their needs. It includes our board of trustees, which 4 years ago dedicated funds specifically for financial aid grants, emergency assistance, and student food pantries. And it includes Rutgers Cooperative Extension, which has a statewide presence, but also recognizes the nutritional needs of our students as part of its mission. Our cooperative extension has for a long time been involved in efforts like Rutgers Against Hunger, and has been working with our student farm and the local community farmers market. They've also worked closely with our planning partner for this conference, Hunger Free New Jersey, which is one of the state's strongest advocates for food security. I'm deeply grateful that the state of New Jersey, under the leadership of Governor Phil Murphy, has recognized the value of campus-based initiatives to address student food insecurity. 3 years ago, even before the pandemic accentuated hunger and other barriers to academic success, legislation signed by the governor distributed more than $1 million to colleges and universities like Rutgers to leverage what was already happening on our campuses. I know this money was deeply appreciated here at Rutgers. It means more resources to fight hunger, to build on good ideas, to expand partnerships and raise awareness both of the need and of the support we are making available. Just as important, it signals to all of us that New Jersey's leadership is with us and wants to help us help each other to address hunger in our campus communities. The pandemic has been hard on everyone in higher education, on faculty, on staff, and most certainly on our students. And it has exacerbated a lot of issues young people are already dealing with, from mental health to financial concerns to uncertainties about the job market of the future. And yet we have to recognize that students are also struggling in too many cases to figure out where their next meal will come from, or even where they'll sleep tonight. That's a terrible burden for a young person to carry, especially when it prevents them from focusing on their tests and papers and lab assignments. A first-rate college education is only as good as a student's ability to take advantage of it. As I said, I'm proud of the good people throughout Rutgers who are working together to, as one of my colleagues put it, outsmart hunger. And the many hundreds of students who have taken advantage of these pantries are proof of their value. This conference is critically important to helping us build on the good work that has already been done on addressing student hunger, and equally important, to keep widening the lens, to keep looking more holistically at the needs of our food insecure students across New Jersey and help serve their needs as comprehensively as possible. Hunger is a vital need, we know that. And it's often a symptom of a deeper problem we can work together to solve so that every New Jersey college student has the best opportunity to complete a degree and find long-term success. With that, I have the great honor to introduce our next speaker to offer his perspective on student hunger. Throughout his time in the governor's office, he has demonstrated a deep commitment to New Jersey's colleges and universities on many levels, as laboratories solving critical problems like the COVID-19 pandemic, as engines of economic development, helping create new jobs across the state, and as pathways to opportunity, educating and training New Jersey's young people for lives of purpose and accomplishment. He believes very strongly in the small d democratic possibilities of an outstanding system of public higher education, and I have been glad to work alongside him already on a number of initiatives to strengthen our state. I'm pleased to introduce the Governor of New Jersey, the Honorable Phil Murphy.
Hey everybody, Governor Phil Murphy here to welcome all of you to the Envisioning Hunger-Free College in New Jersey conference. Eliminating hunger and food insecurity at every college campus in New Jersey is essential to ensuring all of our students are able to learn, grow, and reach their full educational potential. So I thank each and every one of you for your attendance and participation in today's important discussion. Our colleges and universities represent the best and brightest of New Jersey's future. But as we all know, if a student is worried about where their next meal will come from, it is incredibly difficult to focus on their studies. through expanding SNAP eligibility to college students during the pandemic, as well as the Hunger-Free Campus Act. This is something that our administration is working hard to address. Today, your discussion will bring together best practices from across the state, as well as new innovative ideas on how to solve this problem. As we have seen, time and again, especially over the past 2 years, New Jerseyans are committed to taking care of each other. And with the participation of all of you, I know this conference will help us make sure that no one on a college campus in New Jersey goes hungry. I thank you for your attendance today, and I look forward to all that will come from today's important discussions. Thank you all, and God bless each and every one of you.
Thank you for those thoughtful remarks from President Holloway and Governor Murphy. My name is Steph Brescia, and I'm an assistant professor of practice in the Graduate School of Education at Rutgers University. I'm also a member of the Conference Planning Committee. At this time, I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Rashida Crutchfield as our keynote speaker. Dr. Crutchfield is an associate professor in the School of Social Work at California State University, Long Beach, and the executive director of the Center for Equitable Higher Education, whose mission is to advance equitable post-secondary education through research and evaluation for economic, food, and housing justice at all levels. Dr. Crutchfield earned a Master of Social Work at the Brown School of Social Work at Washington University in St. Louis, and her doctorate in educational leadership from CSU Long Beach. She worked for the National Conference for Community and Justice and the American Civil Liberties Union of Eastern Missouri before serving on the Covenant House, California staff, a Los Angeles-based shelter for 18 to 24-year-olds experiencing homelessness. Working here provided Dr. Crutchfield with insight into practice and a deeper understanding of this unique population's strengths, needs, and perspectives. Dr. Crutchfield has been a faculty member at CSU Long Beach since 2007, and she began as an assistant professor in 2014 with a focus on practice and research in youth homelessness, access to higher education, social and economic development, and social work community practice. She was the principal investigator for phase 1 of the California State University's Chancellor Study on Food and Housing Security, and co-principal investigator for phases 2 and 3. These studies are the largest of their kind. I met Dr. Crutchfield in 2018 and had the pleasure of working with her on equity-focused projects. Dr. Crutchfield consistently stands out as a leader in this field for her dedication to conducting and using research to improve the lives of college students and her commitment to identifying lasting, sustainable solutions to address student basic needs and security. As Dr. Crutchfield delivers her keynote address, you are welcome to type questions into the chat. Immediately following her presentation, we will take a guided mindfulness pause and then go into breakout rooms to discuss her presentation. After, we will come back to the main room for a Q&A. Again, you may put your questions in the chat, or you may choose to wait until after our small group discussions to pose your questions. While we may not get to all questions, please note that we are capturing them through the chat feature. Without further ado, I'm delighted to introduce you to our keynote speaker, Dr. Rashida Crutchfield.
Hello, everyone. I'm so glad to be here in this virtual space with you together. Thank you, Steph, for that great introduction. I really appreciate it. Before I hide behind my slides, I definitely want to greet everyone and acknowledge that many of us are coming into this space from a variety of perspectives. Some of us have been in the work directly with students, either on a campus or in our community-based agencies, really, in some way, and often both managing the needs of our students, but also responding to our own reactions to this really difficult work, inspired by the students, but sometimes very much challenged by very daunting tasks. There are decision makers amongst the folks who are here with us today, often squeezing very tight resources despite competing needs and responding to a higher education landscape that is ever expanding and clearly ever changing. We might have some folks who are here really to get informed or have some level of skepticism. I will say that despite the fact that folks perceive California as this liberal island, big island, but nonetheless liberal, when I started talking about this work even 10 years ago, and even 5 years ago, I had folks really questioning whether or not addressing things like food and housing were a part of our mission. I had an upper level administrator in academia, really affirm that we were not our social service agencies. And yet now here we are, fast forward, we understand that students cannot learn if they don't have their basic needs met. Just like the rest of us, if we don't have our basic needs met, it's really much more challenging to meet our own expectations for ourselves. So we have our learners in the space, and we have students. We may have students in this space, and we may have students who see this later, but really it is our students who are the biggest audience, our biggest advocates, our biggest change makers in this space. So I want to acknowledge everyone who's joined us today. You will hear voices from students today, and I know that sometimes can tug on our heart and our head, and so I want you to be prepared for that. Again, as Steph mentioned, my name is Rashida. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm out here in California. And I'm originally from Pittsburgh. I went to high school in Detroit, and my family reminds me regularly how soft I am now with our warm weather and our politics. But we are in this journey together. This is a national journey that we are driving forward to address the needs of our students. So with that, I'm going to share my screen and bring us to some context. So I know that we are here to talk explicitly about food security and hunger. I will also frame our conversation in a wider lens. So basic needs is defined through my work. We really look at, and the work that has been done by many others across the country, as including housing, food, physical mental health, financial well-being, and definitely our pandemic has really highlighted and escalated all of the essential needs that our students must have addressed in order to learn and to achieve and be retained in higher ed. So that includes things like hygiene supplies, transportation, childcare, and the ability to go to work. Recently, I heard from some researchers about their work around looking at the environment. And so one of our campuses in the CSU system is very close to a very industrial area. And so they're looking at air quality as essential. So we are ever expanding in our understanding of basic needs, but I really am going to focus on food and housing and financial well-being today. For context, I am in the California State University, and the CSU is 23 campuses, over 480,000 students, the largest comprehensive public education system in the nation. And in some ways, though, even though our sizes are different, we do have some commonalities to the New Jersey public education landscape. So we have, like you, less than 10% African-American or Black population, and many first-generation students who are the first in their family to gain higher education. I know that I'm in the space with lots of folks who understand these issues, but just to make sure we're all on the same page, we'll do some clarification around our vocabulary. Food security, when we're talking about food security, is defined by the USDA. So high food security, so I am high food secure, right? So I don't worry about my food access at any time. Sometimes, if I miss breakfast, then I think about it, or if I'm watching my COVID waistline expand, I think about food, but generally speaking, that is not my concern. We start talking about food insecurity when we're looking at the low and very low food security at the bottom of your screen. Low food security means that I might feel full, but I don't have the financial means to get the food that I need in order to be well. So I've done quite a lot of studies with thousands of students. And among them, I'll say I had one student who talked about how he didn't have enough money to buy food regularly, but what he would do was buy a bag of apples. And he said, well, an apple a day keeps the doctor away. And so I just eat apples all day long. Now, apples are great, but they are full of sugar as well. And he was not well. And he found the physical manifestations of that lack of wellness to be very real and very, had a real effect on his overall life and school. Now, very low food security is when we're talking about hunger, regularly missing meals because we don't have adequate financial resources. So homelessness, HUD gives us a really restrictive definition of homelessness, often really referring to shelter living or street living. We utilize the US Department of Education definition for homelessness, which is a lack of fixed, regular, or adequate place to stay. So we do have students who are street living, who are living in their cars, but this manifests far more often for students, at least, as they move from place to place. So traveling, I regularly talk to students who might live with a partner for a little while, live with an auntie for a while, live in their car. Students who talk about this experience often talk about it as if it's a part-time job. So I had one student, as I was interviewing her, collecting data, she opened up her planner and she showed how she was navigating figuring out the next place she was going to be. I do quite a lot of traveling as a part of my work. And I know that as I move from place to place, when I wake up in a different place, it's disorientating, it's frustrating. But I know I'm going to have a place to go when that is done. That instability clearly has impacts on health, well-being overall, and educational outcomes.
Friends' couches, a couple nights in my car. Thankfully, it was warm enough to where I'm not freezing to death But when I stayed at a certain friend's house and her roommate was kind of getting annoyed that I was there, I didn't want to overstay my welcome. And I had left that day before showering, and so it really hit me like I don't have a place to shower. Something I would never want to wish upon anybody to go through.
So Elizabeth was a student at Fresno State University, and there's a lot we could pull apart from this quote, from hearing from her. But a couple of things that I will point out is that Elizabeth had never had any experience with homelessness prior to going into college. So the opportunity of cost of stopping the work that she was doing, the full-time job that she had prior to college, in order to try to get that college degree so that she could ultimately have far more financial well-being for the rest of her life, really cost her. So she had financial aid, she had some savings, and she did have a job, but she was evicted from her home. As you likely know, it's expensive to live out here, as it is expensive to live out there. And the owner of her property found that he could find higher market value without a student in his space. So she ended up having to pay for moving costs and a new deposit and all of that stuff. And she ended up living in her car. That also influenced her relationships with her friends, because she found worry that because she had to rely on friends, she ended up socially isolating because she didn't want to feel like a burden to her community. I'm going to talk about some statistics, and a lot of those statistics are drawn from our study in the CSU system. So what we did was we surveyed students across all 23 of our campuses, and we did interviews and focus groups at 11 campuses in Northern, Southern, and Central California, with representation across urban, rural, and suburban communities. That study started with understanding where we were. And so that was interviews with our staff, faculty, and administrators to get a better understanding of how they saw the issues and what they were doing, if anything, to respond to it. And at the time, most people really weren't yet seeing where we fit in responding to students. And this was in 2016. In 2018, we did that study. And then in 2019, we looked at that data again to refine some of our research questions. What we found was that 41.6% of our CSU students reported food insecurity. And I want to compare that to studies that have shown that nationally at 4-year and community colleges, that rate is about 39%. And the Hope Center's work, as well as work that was done by Kara and Steph and other folks in New Jersey, found similar numbers, around 39% food insecurity. We found in terms of homelessness that almost 11% of our CSU students had experienced homelessness within the year. Nationally, that rate is 17%, and I believe that's higher because it's inclusive of our community college, our city college population. Our city college students are more likely to experience food insecurity and homelessness than our 4-year students. And in Jersey, that number is a bit lower at 14%. Well, I'll say that, you know, this work often is in the press. It's been in the news and we've seen it all over. And I try really hard, if you are a person who has had yourself somehow found yourself out in the public eye, reading the comments will ruin your whole day. Will ruin your whole day. And so when something comes up around this research for me, I try not to look at the comments if I can help it, because that can really get you down. But when I do, sometimes what I hear people saying is, why don't students get jobs? Like maybe students need to just work harder. When I was in college, I had to eat cup of noodles, and that's just a part of college life. But the reality, and so we ask students, why don't you have money? What's happening? A lot of people perceive this problem as a problem for students because they don't know how to manage their money. And if they could manage their money better, then they would have food and housing. The reality is our students who experience these issues the worst are most likely to be working more hours. Most likely to be working more hours and are far more likely to also be caring for someone at home, including parents or children. And this really shows us that the students who struggle the most are doing their very best. They're doing everything that they are supposed to do to accomplish what they need to accomplish in order to invest in themselves, in their future, and invest in us, in our communities.
Despite of all, I'm still happy, and I'm grateful to being able to pursue an education. I know a lot of people can't, or haven't been able to. As hard as it is, just the fact that I can eat, I can still come to college or get some kind of degree. That's still a win-win for me.
So Nancy pulls on my heartstrings for a number of reasons. I think definitely the work that we're doing to support students and the struggle that the students themselves are experiencing feels sometimes endless. And hearing that gratitude and that eye on the future is heartwarming. And yet, I don't want Nancy to feel like she has to express that gratitude to make us feel better. I know for me in this work, I have to really push on not wanting to own a savior mentality. It is my job to support students. And yes, I definitely bring extra to the table because I feel like they are so important. But this isn't about me, it's about them. And sometimes students come to the table angry and frustrated, and that can be hard, especially when I'm working so hard. But the reality is, it's about lunchtime here for me, and my stomach is starting to rumble, and I know that I'll be hangry in about an hour. And if I was feeling stressed or frustrated or hungry or tired, I might not show up with this gratitude. And in our spaces, it can be, we have to tap on each other for inspiration, even when our students sometimes show up with those emotions that can be hard to contain or to receive.
In a word, fear. At my age, I'm 42. I have about 25 years left before retirement. If I retire from this job, I'll be one of many elderly who's impoverished, who's unable to effectively care for themselves, and who's unable to simply achieve the necessary things of life. For me, I very much feel I'm in a do or die situation. The goal is to achieve as much as possible academically, so that I can achieve something more professionally.
So higher education at its root, a long time ago, was established to maintain and progress the privilege of people who already had access and wealth. Fundamentally, historically, higher education has been framed around elevating folks who already have access. And in some ways, our institutions haven't changed. We still sometimes frame our thinking around a student population that is 18 to 22, is fully resourced, and is coming straight from high school. But our new traditional students are quickly outnumbering those students. They're older, they're parents, they're working, they have disabilities, they might be undocumented, they're people of color, they may have been under-resourced over time. It is these at-promise students that have to be the frame of our thinking. And it can be hard to pull away from this idea that students will be available to us during regular working hours, rather than students who are meeting many different goals in all of their lives and wisdoms. And of course, COVID continues to challenge our landscape and challenge the landscape of our students. In a study that we did of students who had been already accessing basic needs supports, so we studied 4 campuses and outreach to students who had already tapped into their campus pantry or other services. And we asked them what was going on. And we found that over 1/3 of our students lost jobs. So many of them lost those critical jobs that were making sure that their ends were getting met. Or we had students who stayed in jobs who were essential workers, who were working in food services and other industries, and they were then more likely to be exposed to COVID. All of our students experienced increases in anxiety and instability, and they absolutely found that important services like SNAP, emergency housing, unemployment were crucial to their progression and retention in higher education. So we found in that same study that homelessness, so food security, for some students, food security went up. For other students, it went down. They might have hunkered down with around resources that they already had. And so in some cases, folks who either went home or found community were able to compile those resources to ensure that they could maintain their food at whatever level. But we found homelessness went way up. Students who were experiencing homelessness or on the verge of homelessness prior to COVID ended up homeless after our campus shutdowns. This is Cosmo, and we ask students to develop their own pseudonyms. So I swear I did not name this person Cosmo. He did that for himself. But what he said was, at the beginning of COVID, I lived off campus and all of my roommates lost their jobs. They all left and we left too. We weren't evicted, but technically we weren't on the lease, so we couldn't be there. I was homeless for 3 weeks to a month. He hotel hopped and stayed at a cheap hotel and then eventually found a place to stay. It was really hard, and it was hard for a lot of our students because for many of our students, our campuses are where stability is. They can count on our campuses to be available. They find lots of services on our campuses. There's structure to their schedule. We find often that students who experience homelessness come on campus early and stay all day. And so this becomes, in some cases, a sanctuary. Our campuses become a sanctuary for our students. During COVID, we had lots of students stop utilizing those services though, because they didn't have access to them. Our campuses closed really quickly. And so those really important services like the food pantry, our counseling services, our services and support for students with disabilities, our equity programs, we all had to transition. And so those students lost that sanctuary of stability.
Saving money for my kids so they don't have to go through this. Unfortunately, I can't change anything about my situation, but hopefully I can change the pattern for the future.
So we're looking at the future and we're looking at what we can do now. We can talk about all the challenges, but we also want to have hope, and we want to think about how do we frame what's next for us. In California, we for the first time got ongoing funds focused on basic needs. And New Jersey, with your hunger-free campus status, really helps us shift a bit from a scarcity mentality. A lot of work that we do is definitely heart work, and we build our programs and responses with the best of intentions. And as we find more policy that supports us, more opportunities for resources, we can be innovative and transformative in our thinking about what's next. Sometimes what we do is we create services that are mirroring our charity support for these kinds of issues or poverty response outside of higher education. But in higher ed, we have an opportunity to be creative, because outside of higher ed, entities like HUD, for instance, can tend to be very restrictive and sometimes perpetuate and double down on poverty, requiring folks to perform their poverty to prove that they're worthy for supports and services. We don't have to replicate that. We have the opportunity to think more creatively about this. So one of the things we do is we develop hubs. Some folks call those single points of contact. And that's not necessarily one person, but it's co-located resources where students can go one time, tell their story once, not have to go through that over and over again, and get connected to resources. Often it's helpful to staff those hubs with at least one social worker, because if you've got a social worker in the house, one, they have training around trauma-informed care and responsiveness, but also they can supervise social work interns who then get an opportunity for learning, but you expand your staffing exponentially with those interns who are getting that learning opportunity, but are not necessarily fiscally compensated. Of course, the best way to address homelessness is to ensure that we have affordable housing. In California, we're trying really hard to develop our affordable housing platforms and strategies. And I'll talk a little bit about some of our other opportunities around housing. But one of the things that we can do when we don't have land and/or funds to build housing is to fund housing navigators. And that's someone who can help students find existing opportunities for housing. They can prepare students to be good neighbors in the community, but also they can connect to management companies and landlords to help build those relationships so that those landlords know that they will have consistent folks in their housing. We have found that some students experience discrimination, not only because of their race or other marginalities, but also we've found students who find housing and the landowner or the management company is ready to receive them, but they find out they're a student and then they retract that offer. So those housing navigators can make those connections. We want to make sure that we recruit students for our supports that need it the most. So often we want, I mean, if we have all kinds of resources, we want to cast a wide net. We want to integrate our basic needs supports on our campuses so that people feel like it's a place that anyone can go. There's no stigma around going to the financial aid office. So there shouldn't be stigma around going to the pantry. And if we talk about that pantry in a way that serves everyone, then that's great. And we can specialize some of our resources to make sure that the students who are most at promise are receiving the services. So we know that Black students, undocumented students, former foster students, our LGBTQIA family, those folks are most likely to experience food insecurity and homelessness. And as my friend Ruben Canedo has said, if we can find those students when they haven't paid their fees, we can find them to make sure that they get the supports that they need. So one of the things that we're doing is we've developed a program that's college-focused rapid rehousing. And we use the terminology rapid rehousing, but it's not the federal program. What we do is we've had funding from the state. And so we have a partnership. So for me, my campus is Long Beach State. We have a partnership with an organization called Hoviness Inc. And Hoviness Inc. is a community-based housing agency that then we find students on campus who experience homelessness. We refer them in a warm handoff to Hoviness, and then Hoviness places the student in fully subsidized housing and wraps them with case management. And that really is far and away a promising practice that goes beyond the emergency housing that we've been doing in the past. And it is that close link between the institution and the community-based agency that addresses the fact that we are not experts in this work and that we have to work together with our community-based partners to be sure that our students get what they need. So our faculty, okay, so as a faculty person, I recognize that faculty can be a pain in the ass. I said it, I put it there, sorry. But our faculty are our key connection to our students, right? So sometimes students will go to student services, they will. But if they want to graduate, at least at some point, they have to come into our classrooms. And if our faculty are trained and aware of how to notice that when a student seems distracted or agitated or falling asleep, it might not be because they don't think I'm that brilliant as I think I am. It might be that they haven't had a place to sleep or they haven't had a meal today. And then I know where to send them and how to do that in a way that respects their experience. Clearly, I'm a researcher, so I think it's incredibly important to evaluate what we're doing to make sure that we are reaching the students that we are intending to reach and having the outcomes we intend to have. The Mission Asset Fund, in collaboration with the College Futures Foundation, developed a financial equity framework. So the College Futures Foundation in spring of 2020 developed a scholarship program to help support students who had who were basic needs insecure. And what they found was that the first come, first serve option that many of us use isn't the most effective. The people who show up first often are, even if they are in fact struggling, are the most resourced and most able to reach us. If we're going to get to those students, who need it the most, they developed this equity framework to identify and prioritize students who benefit the most from very limited resources. We want to make sure that we're implementing creative and destigmatizing awareness campaigns. So the president of Alamo College, Russell Lowry Hart, has said, and they did a wonderful outreach where instead of reaching out to students and saying things like, I know you're a student in need and we're here to support you, they said, we know that you're an at-promise student and you are being awarded with this cadre of supports. And our reframing of that narrative, both in our own mind and in our body and our spirit, and also in how we communicate to others, is critical. As your president said, sustaining support for SNAP and codifying these changes to SNAP policies is also critical. Right now, we have a bill, California bill, AB 288, that just got bipartisan support to codify. Nope, I'm wrong with that number. I'll come back to you with it. But we're trying to codify those SNAP policy changes. This is a terrible graphic of the work that we're doing at Long Beach State because it has too much stuff on it, but I'll say that we are addressing food in a variety of ways, including swipe programs. We have an app that connects students to available food on campus, as well as our beach pantry. We're Long Beach, so everything we do has beach related something in it. We have emergency housing. We also have hotel vouchers for our parenting students because we don't have family housing. We also have our rapid rehousing program that I mentioned already. We have emergency grants, and we also have financial support in other capacities. This really is work that we have to do as a community because none of us can do it on our own. It's about engaging in research. It's looking at our higher education systems globally for full understanding of our higher education ecosystems, really meaningfully partnering with our community-based agencies and engaging in our policy advocates and our policy makers.
I strongly believe that education is the greatest investment that the society can put upon itself. An investment in us, which is the future, which is the next generation, is the most rewarding for an economy, for research, for science, for literature, for culture, the arts, and for any budget cuts to be coming towards us will dramatically affect us. They affect our health, they affect our future, they affect our progression out of poverty.
So this piece of art was done by an artist named Alicia Wormsley, who has been really well known both in New York and in Pittsburgh. She also is my cousin, and these women are matriarchs in my family standing in my grandmother's backyard. And in my family, we sing. It's normal. So, you know, if we're in the kitchen together, we sing. If we're walking around, we sing. If someone wants something from upstairs, they yell. But we sing everywhere. And I am not going to sing for you today. That's not what's happening. Sorry. But what I will say is I feel like this is a really strong metaphor for the work that we're in. When you are singing with a group of people, we might all sing out loud, but sometimes we need to take a breath. This is difficult work. And sometimes you have to stop and take a breath. But when you do that, someone else sings louder, sings into the note so that you can take your breath. We have built this community together so that we can build this beautiful song for our students. And I thank all of you for your work. Thank you so much. And thank you for having me today.
Thank you so much, Dr. Crutchfield, for that very moving and enlightening presentation. I see folks are already thanking you in the chat and asking questions, which is absolutely wonderful. So at this point in time, we do want to make sure that all of our attendees have a chance to process Dr. Crutchfield's presentation. So we're going to move into breakout rooms shortly. In those spaces, again, you'll have the opportunity to discuss the keynote address. From there, we will return to the main room for a Q&A. And if you've dropped things in the chat, I have them recorded so we can begin with those questions. Before we go into breakout rooms, we are just going to take a quick 1-minute pause. And I'm very pleased to welcome and introduce Steph Galante of Mindful Educator, who will be leading us through a short meditation and stretch. And then from there, we will go into our breakout room.
Hello, everyone. I'm so thrilled to be here with all of you. Just trying to get my video started, if I can do that. In the meantime, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Steph Galante. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm joining you from the ancestral lands of the Lenape here in central New Jersey. And for this mindfulness session, we'll do a quick awareness check-in. As Dr. Crutchfield said, it's important to take a breath. And so we'll do that together as a community, as a collective, and maybe a little bit of regulation for your nervous system. It's especially helpful if you're feeling big or a lot of feelings. And so you're welcome to turn away from your screen, turn off your screen. You're welcome to close your eyes if you'd like to, and come to a way of being that feels supportive to you. That might be standing, sitting, lying down, or maybe even moving around your space. And if it's accessible to you, everyone, bring your attention to the surface beneath you and your connection to it. Notice the connection there, how it feels, all the characteristics of it as well. And then I'd like for you, when you feel settled, to perhaps bring some movement into your body, maybe by simply lifting and lowering your heels in a bouncing motion. Maybe bending your knees, one and the other, or maybe both at the same time, and allowing that movement to travel up through your hips, into your torso, and maybe shaking those arms out. And this is very important when you're feeling a lot of things, maybe things that you cannot name, maybe feelings that you don't know what to do with yet, maybe when you have some questions or you're feeling overwhelmed, to just allow yourself to settle that energy so that you can create space for it to exist. And then when you're ready, my friends, if it feels open to you, to slowly begin to slow the movement down and come to a place of stillness or very slow movement. And then tune your attention to your breath if that feels accessible to you. Noticing the inhale as the breath comes in and the exhale as the breath leaves. You might simply bring your hands in front of your body, or even if it feels comfortable to you, place your hands on your ribs or on your abdomen and feel the torso expand with the inhale and contract and release with the exhale. Remembering that no matter your experience in this world at any given time, you have agency over your body, over your breath. You have agency over your connection to the present moment, to the collective, your colleagues and those you serve. And you have agency over the energy you bring to those moments. And so anytime you're feeling big things or hard things, or a lot of things. Come back to yourself in the moment, to the breath moving in and out, and see if you could slow it down just a little bit more. Nice, smooth breaths here in a way that feels supportive for you. Every breath connecting you deeper to the collective, to yourself and your awareness in the moment, to the questions you might have, maybe feeling uncertain or overwhelmed, maybe more questions than answers at this moment. And that is all okay. It's okay for things to be open-ended for a little while. Stand firm right here in the knowledge that the work you're doing is ongoing. It is difficult, but it is fruitful. And you're on the path together. Continue to connect deeply here to yourself and to each other as you envision a hunger-free campus. My friends, when you're ready, you can go ahead and slowly begin to move the body around. Let that breath come back to normal as you welcome yourself back into this space and to the rest of your time here. It's been a pleasure to be a part of session with all of you.
Thank you so much, Steph, for helping us reframe, feel a little bit more refreshed before we enter these breakout rooms. At the moment, we are going to get into our breakout room. For our attendees, you will be randomly assigned to a room, and each room has a trained facilitator in it who will introduce themselves and guide your discussion. These breakout rooms, again, will serve as a space for you to discuss, to reflect, to ask questions, to talk about Dr. Crutchfield's keynote address. You will have access to your cameras and microphones in the breakout rooms, but again, these spaces are not being recorded. You may turn on your camera if you wish, but we do ask that you remain muted as a courtesy to our facilitators and attendees and use the raise hand feature. To join your breakout room, you simply just need to select the join button. We will be back here in 30 minutes, so that will be promptly at 3:28 p.m. And our wonderful tech folks will send prompts as we're getting closer to the end of our time together. All right, folks, welcome back. I hope that you all had a wonderful time in your breakout rooms and were able to have some really fruitful conversations and discussions. So at this point in time, I would like to open up the floor for questions. So if you have a question that you would like to ask, something that you want to learn more about, something that you're so curious about, we do have Dr. Rashida Crutchfield here with us. If you can kindly place your question in the chat, we can start beginning our conversation with Dr. Crutchfield. And to kick us off, we can actually start with one of the questions, Dr. Crutchfield, that we received during your presentation. So we had a question about the differences, if you could speak a little bit more about the differences between basic needs and security on community college campuses and a four-year college campus, and also how you might envision that four-year colleges and community colleges can work together to collaboratively support students, especially since we know that so many of our community college students do go on to those four-year institutions.
Those are all really compelling questions. Thank you for the offering. So we know that the rates of food insecurity and homelessness and housing instability are higher at community colleges for a variety of reasons. You know, our populations, though, are concentric circles and very much overlap. We definitely have folks who are coming back to school and may go to community college as a place to find their credential for the practice they want to keep, or as a leveraging point either for another degree. And so we have more of our marginalized students, more of our students of color, more of our low-income students going to community college. And our community colleges sometimes are not as resourced, quite frankly. So, community colleges, generally speaking, don't have housing. At California State University, Long Beach, we do have housing, but we are a campus of almost 40,000 students with housing for about 2,500 students, but at least we have someplace. So even when we were starting to do emergency housing for our students, we had at least a place to start. And many of our community colleges don't have that. I love the question about the connection between the community colleges and our four-year institutions, because I think that's vital. In Long Beach, we have something called the Long Beach Promise, which says that we are going to support our Long Beach students, although we are a commuter college, so our students come from way further than Long Beach, but we know that we want to very much support our Long Beach students through K-12 to community college and then to the CSU. One of the things that we're doing through our program, that rapid rehousing program, that college-focused rapid rehousing, because I want to be careful about the use of that federal language of rapid rehousing, but what we're doing is we do have students who are in a rapid rehousing program at Long Beach City College, and they are then transferring to Long Beach State, and that handoff, they don't have to move. So they're still being supported in subsidized housing through our community-based agency and moving to our CSU. And that, I think, is the finest example of a true handoff. I think even if we think about our K-12 system, often, we also have to think about, we have students who are experiencing these issues in K-12, and up until recently, we just kind of hoped that all of that went away. We had, free or reduced lunch in K-12, and then somehow decided, oh, that goes away, but clearly it does not. So thinking also about the connections we build with our McKinney-Vento liaisons and our other counselors, although we know that all of these folks at all levels are overtaxed, but any way we can smooth those transitions is really incredibly important. I see lots of questions in the chat coming at me.
Yes, they are everywhere, and I will help you navigate them, don't worry. But yeah, that transition piece is really critically important, whether it's from K-12 to community college to a four-year institution. If students are losing services at every step of the way, it's really going to impact and hinder their ability to be successful when it doesn't necessarily have to be the case. So another question that we have for you, Rashida, in the chat is, thinking about this really community-wide effort to address student basic needs and security. So we talked about, how we need that on the institution side, but also the community member sides and creating partnerships. So the question here is, how can we conduct effective community outreach? So thinking about spreading awareness about community-based programs and how we can get that information to our colleges and universities and also to students.
It's complex because, and our community-based agencies often are under-resourced as well, right? And so adding the student population, which they may or may not have been perceiving as a part of their population before, really, engenders an opportunity for us to advocate at the state level to make sure that all of our, community stakeholders have what they need to respond to our communities writ large. That said, I think one of the things that we sometimes fall down on the higher ed side is making meaningful connections with community-based agencies. So sometimes what we do is we hold a meeting where everybody gets introduced and then that's it, right? And so making those meaningful partnerships where we have actual action steps. So this is how we make an appropriate referral to you, and this is how the feedback loop comes back, and this is when we will meet again to reassess the effectiveness of that partnership. I think sometimes our students on campuses don't see our community-based agencies as appropriate fit for them. So they are less likely to go to the community-based food pantry unless they've had that experience in their past, because they see that. Our students often think about, I like to call it a hierarchy of need. So I will sit and listen to a student tell me that they're living in their car and they eat once a day maybe, but they know that there's someone else out there who's suffering more than them, and so they can't access those services. So for me, I have the opportunity, and our community has the opportunity to reframe that we are all worthy of support. And then when we have actual steps where we are building these relationships with community-based agencies, really understanding what they do and helping them understand what we can and can't do, because there's some misconceptions there also about what's happening on both sides. And the ebb and flow of our workload and our schedule and how students come in and flow out of our institutions, all of that understanding can be built, and then we can have far more fluid transitions and handoffs between us. Did I answer your question, Steph?
Yeah, it's all connected, right? Between the services and transitions and building the partnerships to really make sure that these students are supported and supported in the best way possible. And Dr. Crutchfield, so we're getting a lot of questions in the chat about COVID, of course. And as you highlighted in your presentation, we saw that COVID really did exacerbate a lot of the challenges. A lot of students had campuses as their place for their services, for resources, for that sense of security. And when that was lost, there were a lot of challenges for students, especially in terms of meeting their basic needs. So one of the questions that we have is looking at this from a sustainability perspective, how can colleges, universities, community organizations be better prepared for things that are future crises? We saw COVID was unexpected, but we see similar challenges when there's climate emergencies, when students go home for breaks and don't have a home to go home to for that break. So how can institutions really work to navigate some of that unknown and be more prepared to support students in the future?
That's such a great question. I love questions. I don't have all the answers, but I do enjoy good questions. And I think, we are thinking about that too. I mean, we have fires here where people and floods and all kinds, we think about California as a lovely place to stay, but we've got lots of national disasters or state disasters out here that we have to navigate. And really looking at what we've learned in the pandemic has really helped us think about all of those in a big way. I think a lot of us at all levels in many different areas realized that we could do things that we said we absolutely could not do before. So we would say things like, well, we can't provide food for students at home, but then we saw campuses delivering food home, right? So we saw a lot of campuses using food app delivery systems to get students what they needed at home. We said that we couldn't help students with technology, but then we saw hotspots and computers going home to students. I think we have the opportunity to be careful not to fall back as we start coming back to campus, fall back to saying thinking about what we can't do. I think, we acknowledge that often we are strapped. We're trying to navigate tight resources and thinking about how to best utilize those resources, when they feel really scarce. And I think part of that means that we have to explore, again, those connections with community-based agencies, to push on our state legislators to resource us in an ongoing way. So when in California, when we have ongoing funds right now, but before this, we had to ask and we had to push, and we had our students who were the biggest advocates. It really has been, I don't know whether I said this in the large space or in a small group, but our students really were the best lobbyists that we could ask for. They were the best lobbyists at our chancellor's office in the CSU. They were best lobbyists at the state level. They were the loudest, and they let us know that they are our investment. And so our legislature has responded sometimes, right? And so that push has been, so part of the work really is providing them the support they need to be the advocates that they are.
Thank you. And Dr. Crutchfield, we're getting a lot of questions around the equity piece, which is wonderful. So you talked a little bit about how the first come, first serve model might not be the most equitable, but that is one of the models that we are really utilizing a lot in higher ed when it comes to delivering resources and services to students. What are some other ways that we could approach this resource delivery system so that it is more equitable and we are getting those resources in the hands of students that need them the most?
So the reference that I made in in my conversation was, and I'm putting it in the chat, the financial equity framework. And so this was a framework that was developed by the Mission Asset Fund in collaboration with the College Futures Foundation. And they did really good research and developed a matrix to identify and engage and prioritize students who needed those services the most. So I think for us, the pantries are a great landing point in terms of developing a campus climate that is open and accepting. So an example I'll say is at Humboldt State University, they have a program called OSNAP. And when I talk to students, when I do interviews and focus groups with students up at Humboldt and I'm walking around on campus or I'm virtually reaching them out to them, students who are marginalized, students who are not marginalized, everybody knows about OSNAP. And it is, they've done a really wonderful job of destigmatizing that resource. It has become very much like sometimes you would think of a cultural center. So for me, the Black students always used to hang out in the Black Student Center, and we all hung out on the couches. And OSNAP is like that, but there's also food there, and there's also someone to help enroll people in SNAP, and there's also someone to help our housing navigator that's there. And so all of those things are there, but it's also a lounge where people can relax. I think the pantry is a great way to communicate to the campus community that this is a safe space and that all of these resources are open for everyone. But when we want to think about things like emergency grants or funds or housing, we have to be far more strategic, right? So we need to really use tools like our equity framework, or we know who they are, right? Like in Texas, it really was their Latinx men who were not showing up for services, but were far, really far and largely their community at promise. And so they actively pulled those matrices, pulled out that population and sent them letters saying, you have been awarded these supports. And then, Russell said, basically, he had men bringing their children with them to come in and receive this award because they were proud, rather than feeling like they were going somewhere where they were going to be seen as needy.
Thank you. And that's really helpful, especially for the folks here, because we're still misconceptualizing what does hunger-free college in New Jersey look like. So those examples are really helpful, especially thinking through reducing the stigma, providing wraparound services, putting services in spaces where students can access them. And all of those are really, really great points. And that kind of leads us to one of our next questions that we got from a couple different groups. So based on some of what we learned today about students that might be experiencing basic needs insecurity, these students might not have the time to be connected beyond attending classes. So their only touch point might be those faculty and those professors. How can we work to train faculty? How have you worked to train faculty to engage members of your campus community in providing trauma-informed care and recognizing that students experiencing these challenges and then being that point of contact and that point of referral?
Faculty. I'm happy to identify as a faculty person, but I also know that our staff work really hard, and then the academic side ends up getting all the glory. And so, and then we walk in like we know everything. So it is an interesting dance. I think the marriage between our student affairs and our academic affairs folks at the highest levels are most important in many ways, because I think sometimes faculty are, I'm clear that faculty are not necessarily rewarded or evaluated against what they do to support students in this way. And so if we can help our administration help help our faculty articulate all of that extra work that they do to support students in how they're evaluated, that helps. It shouldn't have to, but it does. Particularly our faculty of color, who tend to end up being ad hoc mentors for our students of color in many ways. But on the ground for our faculty, I think starting with things like the syllabus statement, so giving faculty language to put in their syllabus that says, many students are challenged with meeting their food and housing and financial well-being. I think having that language and helping faculty, like when on that first day when we're reading the syllabus and we're saying, and then there's those policies at the end of the syllabus, read those, like giving faculty their talking points to say those things out loud, I think is important. I mean, I beat the drum of basic needs, I think all day, every day, but I've had students in my classes who tell me, just the fact that you said that at the beginning of the semester, they say in my evaluations at the end, I never talked to you about it, but I thought I was by myself until you said that in class. And so I went to the food pantry. So thank you for mentioning it, right? Because that opens the door for the students. Embedding training for faculty in meetings they already have to go to is always a great opportunity. You know, your choir will show up for extra training, but if there's professional development or faculty meetings that you can colonize to help our faculty understand their place in this journey, I think that's really helpful, really helpful.
Yeah, and I think also just hearing the voices, right? So we heard so many voices from students today where we can learn and connect more with some of those experiences and what their experience is like on our campuses. We have a few more minutes left. Some questions that we're getting in the chat are related to policy efforts. And I know that you've talked quite a bit about some of what's happening policy-wise, but are there other policy efforts that would help to support students, whether that is through getting them towards food security or housing security?
Steph, I got distracted by the chat. Can you?
That's okay. Can you talk to us a little bit more about some of the policy efforts, both on the food security side and the housing security side, that are currently happening to support college students?
Yeah, so my favorite right now is codifying these changes to SNAP, to trying to change the work requirements and many of the restrictions for SNAP access for students. Up until recently, students were categorically ineligible for SNAP unless, so there's the unless, right? Unless they're part of this equity program or unless they're work study eligible. And even in some cases, some folks' interpretation of the law is that they have to be in a work study job, which is not the letter of the law. And so really clarifying those laws, codifying the changes that we've made, releasing the work requirement of 20 hours work for students, all of that is really important and I think critical to next steps to really addressing food security, because our pantries are amazing, but SNAP is far more sustainable for many of our folks who would otherwise be SNAP eligible if they were out in community and not students. One of the things that's moving in the California state legislature is a California bill to ban scholarship displacement. So a lot of us are giving, including private foundations, are looking to do grants to students to address their housing or food security. So students might get a $500 grant, but what happens is that grant then goes against their scholarship opportunity. So they may get this $500, but then lose it from their financial aid package, which makes zero sense at all. I understand. Nope, I don't. I'm not even gonna pretend to understand. It's not okay, right? And so there's a lot of work around trying to stop this scholarship displacement. And I think that's really important. Funding for affordable housing, expanding campus housing, both at the community college and the state college, the four-year institutions, is really important as well. And I think, you know, we're seeing community colleges in California starting to invest in housing. And then we are at the CSU expanding our housing options. I think what we need to be mindful of as we're expanding our housing options is that we're careful about not creating the housing systems that we've had before. So a lot of institutions and developers of campus housing are thinking about boutique housing that is meant to entice well-resourced students into our campus, but we need affordable housing, and we need to also be careful about not ghettoizing our students. So not having the affordable housing in one place and the not so affordable housing in someplace else, really leveling the playing field as we're developing more housing resources. I think those are my favorite policies at the moment, but of course, you know, there is that free college that I'm looking for. I'm looking at the Bidens to fulfill some promises around tuition relief and debt relief for our students as well.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Crutchfield. And you know, that will be all the time that we have for questions today. But thank you so much for being here for your presentation. And I also want to note that we started getting into, you know, policy, advocacy, reducing stigma, innovative programming to address student basic needs and security. And we're actually going to be speaking about all of those things again during our session tomorrow. So if folks are interested in learning more about those topics, we do have a few different panel presentations that will specifically address all of those areas. So thank you so much for being with us, Dr. Crutchfield. We are so greatly appreciative.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
You have been an absolute pleasure, and everyone is very excited to have you here. So with that, we are going to wrap up our first day in just a few minutes. But before we do depart, I want to first introduce you to Lisa Pitts from Hunger Free New Jersey, who has been a member of our conference planning committee. Lisa is the outreach director for Hunger Free New Jersey, and she works in communities throughout the state to improve access to healthy food and convenes numerous local, community, county, and statewide coalitions who work together to address hunger. So a little bit about what we were just speaking about. I've had the pleasure with working with Lisa on the conference planning committee, and I'm excited to hear a little bit more from her before the end of our session today.
Great. Thank you so much. And welcome everybody. And thank you so much for being here. Can you all see my screen? Thumbs up? Okay. So as Stephanie said, I am the outreach director at Hunger Free New Jersey. Hunger Free New Jersey is a statewide anti-hunger advocacy organization. And we work to advance policy and programs to fight hunger in New Jersey throughout our state, not just for college students, but making sure that people have access to healthy food 365 days a year. We do that by educating the public and decision makers about hunger, its causes and solutions. And we mobilize diverse organizations and push for sweeping changes to policy and programs that improve access to healthy food. For example, we've done work to improve access to SNAP for college students. We work with our elected officials to get legislation passed that addresses hunger in our state. And we convene both statewide and local coalitions who work together to address hunger and food insecurity. So to that end, I want to invite everybody today to join a brand new coalition that we're going to be starting up, the New Jersey Hunger Free Campus Network. This network will work together to advance change so that all New Jersey college students have enough healthy food to eat every single day. The coalition will do this by identifying a broad range of solutions, many of which we talked about today, from opening food pantries to policies and legislative solutions to the issue. And we'll work together and engage others in our work to achieve our identified goals. Who can join this group? Everyone. We encourage faculty, administrators from colleges and universities throughout the state, community-based organizations, concerned citizens, and especially students are strongly encouraged to participate in this Hunger-Free Campus Network. You can sign up by going to this very lengthy link here, which I will also put in the chat box. We would also love it if everybody here today would like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter. And if anyone has any questions, you can feel free to reach out to me at this contact information here. And I will put the link for Hunger-Free Campus Network in the chat box. We're going to meet virtually initially, and we're going to have our first meeting in the spring. So please sign up today. Thank you so much. And with that, I am going to stop sharing my screen and turn it over to Ann Newman. Ann is the Associate Vice Chancellor for Student Affairs, and she's going to provide some closing remarks. Ann?
Thank you, Lisa. So on behalf of the conference committee, I'd like to thank everyone for your engagement. We heard from a wonderful keynote and participated in great breakout sessions. Thank you to all of our volunteer facilitators, the conference organizing team, and special thank you to Dr. Crutchfield. We'll convene tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. In addition to hearing from the Secretary of Higher Education in New Jersey, we will listen to one panel focused on policy and advocacy and a second panel focused on programming. We'll close out the conference with breakout sessions and end about 11:30. So as a reminder, you'll use the same Zoom link tomorrow that you used today, so you can find us. So everyone have a great evening, and we will see you bright and early tomorrow morning at 9 a.m.